If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address. This evening, we're going to be discussing two separate subjects. The first one's going to be Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. Are they or aren't they going to get divorced? Well, the rumors around the white media are that there may be a serious split between the ultimate power couple, Michelle and Barack Obama. We put Michelle first because, hey, she wears the pants in that family, right? And the reason that they gave is that because Michelle opted not to attend the funeral of President Jimmy Carter with Barack Obama because Trump was going to be there, and she refused to attend Trump's second inauguration for the same reason. Barack Obama, of course, will be going. And, of course, you have these feminists who are praising the idea of Michelle Obama fueling those divorce rumors. I guess as far as they're concerned, you go, girl, straight to divorce court. Because black breakups, black dysfunction, that's what the white media encourages. That's what they like to see. Because for them, and it doesn't matter if it's some right-wing rag or some left-wing blowhard, to have the first non-white presidential couple divorce, that would be a huge coup for the white media. The tabloids would have material for years off of that one. They would love it. Obama has tried to put the kibosh on these rumors by going out of his way to publicly wish his wife happy birthday, something that he really hadn't gone this overboard with in the past. So clearly he's trying to dispel these rumors. Rumors of a divorce are entirely unfounded, by the way. Michelle Obama's entire identity is that she's Barack Obama's wife. I mean, what else is she if she wasn't that? And being a first lady, even a former one, is not something that you can just walk away from and still keep whatever esteem and status and fame that you previously had. Power at that level doesn't really work like that. Now, outside of the black media, you've had the usual suspects who have been hand-wringing and kvetching about this, and they're worried about whether or not the Obamas getting divorced is going to mean anything. Not really. And they're talking about, oh, we don't want to see this power couple split up. Let me tell you something. Power couples are largely a fiction. Normally, you got one person in the relationship who's the power, and the other person simply is there to make them a couple. People actually call Prince Harry and Meghan Markle a power couple. First of all, if Meghan had married anyone other than an English prince, people wouldn't be talking about her at all. Let's be honest about that. Meghan Markle was married before, you know, to a film producer, white of course, and then they got divorced just 2 years later. Bet you didn't know that, did you? And nobody was calling them a power couple. So now she's married to an English prince. Well, used to be prince. He's like a duke or something now, right? But it's weird to call them a power couple because Harry isn't some great businessman. He's not some mogul. His only accomplishment is having been born into the British royal family, so he won the genetic lottery, which was not his doing at all. He had nothing to do with that. So what power does he have? His family and relatives publicly humiliated him, including his wrinkled-up granny. And his father basically did what amounted to a banishment of him in all but name. So again, where's the power here? You know, there were people who were calling Michael Jordan and his now ex-wife a power couple, but again, were it not for Michael, what power would there have been? There's a lot of people who apparently they think that their identity is somehow wrapped up in the Obamas. I guess it just goes to show some black folks never learn. Let's be bluntly honest here. The reason that the dregs over in Shea Butter Twitter pretend to be so enamored with Michelle Obama isn't because they like her. They don't know anything about her. The only thing that they know is she wasn't some high yellow female that Barack Obama married. She wasn't that. She was a dark-skinned black woman, and to them, that was a certain level of legitimacy and righteousness that gave Barack Obama this irreversible and apparently indelible mark of goodness. They could care less about anything else the man did. And they certainly didn't care about what Michelle Obama did before she was the first lady. You ask most of these shea butter bootlicks what Michelle's profession was, what she did before Obama was selected to be senator back in 2004, and they can't even tell you. Obama was the power, and his wife made them a couple. That being the case, what the hell has it got to do with black folks? Nothing. And there's also something else wrong with this picture. I've said for many years that when you get to people in powerful positions, these folks don't really have marriages. They have arrangements. Why do you think Hillary Clinton was so willing to endure the repeated humiliations that she suffered due to Bill Clinton's refusal to keep his rocket in his pocket? It was because she knew it was a good idea to hitch her wagon to his star. Bill Clinton, you'll recall, as a teenager, had met with President John Kennedy. This was part of some sort of white boys youth group trip that took place in the early 60s. So, as early as his teen years, there were people who were already thinking that this bright young hillbilly might have potential for law or high politics. And Barack Obama was also recruited in similar fashion. Senior Democrat operatives and later political figures like Tom Daschle realized that Obama had that rare combination of charisma and devious wit, that he could lie through his teeth and people would still love him regardless. Barack Obama used what the white media like to call smoothness. There was very little smooth about the man. But what he did have the ability to do was to BS his way through a conversation. He mastered the art of talking a lot while saying absolutely nothing. And when the white media claimed that he had some sort of profound stuff to say, so many people were gullible enough to go right along with that propaganda. But understand, practically all of the corporate figures you've ever seen were largely inventions of their corporate donors, the white media, and the political establishment backing them up. For the longest time, many of us in the black media have told you that Barack Obama may well actually be bisexual. That's not said to insult him. It's said for the same reasons that we told you that Will Smith, who is part of another so-called power couple, might also be bisexual as well. You saw what happened with another power couple, Andrew Big Bussy Gillum and his wife. There's another guy who the Democrat establishment were grooming for big things, but then he got caught passed out in a hotel room with some male escorts, and that was the end of that. But the point is that power couples are not what you think they are. Also, we don't need to pretend as if the Obamas are somehow integral to us, or that their marriage was built on respect. That's something that they tell the unthinking masses so that they will like these people, trust them, invest in them emotionally, and say, hey, they're just like us. And then you'll be likely to buy whatever line of BS that they start peddling. But Michelle Obama is showing that all her little hood rat antics were, of course, not an act at all. This is who this woman actually is, disrespectful. All of that finger wagging she was doing at black men, where do you think she got it from? She practices that behind closed doors with Barack Obama and been doing it for a long while, I'll bet. Whether the Obamas stay together or if Barack finally comes out of the closet and leaves Michelle for another man is immaterial to me. Neither one of them did a thing for the black community except to insult us for going on 16 years straight. They're a couple of self-interested social climbers. Don't kid yourself. The Republicans aren't the only ones who would love to see Michelle, or Barack for that matter, file for divorce. The white media is also salivating at the prospect that these two might break up, and why not? They've both been willing pawns of white power, and as we all know, when white power is done with its tools, it breaks its tools. And to utterly defame and destroy these two in particular, why, that would be the crowning achievement of breaking tools as far as the white media is concerned. After all, Barack Obama has spent his entire adult life married not to Michelle Obama, but rather wedded to white power. And that being the case, well, as I mentioned earlier, white power also doesn't have marriages with people as much as it has arrangements. And when that arrangement no longer serves white power's interest, they bring it to an end, along with the individual or individuals who thought that somehow they had friends with white power. Now, there's also something else I wanted to talk about for this evening's address. It happens to be the ban on TikTok, and the fact that this is part of an overall series of legislative and policy initiatives and drives geared toward trying to basically put the social media internet genie back in the bottle. Now, before I go any farther, yes, I do happen to be this Luddite Gen Xer, so I don't care for any of that stuff like TikTok. As far as I'm concerned, all they've done is tell young people how to steal cars and such. It's an annoyance. But there is a reality here. No matter what the U.S. government may say about how it's concerned about TikTok being owned in part by the Chinese government, potentially, the real concerns that they have happen to be that TikTok does data mining and does not turn any of that information over to the U.S. government. No matter what corporations like Facebook, Twitter, and others may tell you, they frequently give the information that they data mine over to the government, and not just when the government files some sort of court action asking for it. The ties between these social media companies and Uncle Sam is incestuous. Believe that. So what is this really about? Well, it's not necessarily about any concerns that the Chinese government happens to be spying on Americans through the app, which is what the original claim was. Later on, they said, well, it's being used as a tool of Chinese propaganda, as opposed to these social media corporations, which largely spread American propaganda. And I can say for a fact that the Israeli government definitely didn't like the fact that TikTok was the main place where people were hearing the Palestinian side of the war in Gaza. They didn't like that because it was a way to circumvent the establishment media, which the Israelis have on lock, just like the Israeli government's got the U.S. government eating out of their hand. They didn't like the fact that TikTok was a place where the gory details of what the IDF was really doing could be seen by the world. They didn't like that. And of course, the US government didn't like that either. So as far as they were concerned, this is the Chinese propaganda that they were really concerned about. Any sort of political viewpoint or any sort of news that gets around the filters that the US government and its white supremacist allies put in place. This is not to say the Chinese are the good guys. They're not. But it is to say that for a large number of people around the world, and including in the United States, TikTok represented a lot more than just a bunch of asinine online challenges and a bunch of attention-whoring stunts by the latter half of the millennials and practically all of Generation Z. And it's not just a matter of young people getting their information online. It's a matter of them getting it from the right places. For example, WhatsApp is owned by Facebook. And that means that all of these young people around the world who would have their WhatsApp groups, and they would use those WhatsApp groups to get their news and such, that meant that Mark Zuckerberg had veto power over what it was they got to see, how prominently it would be shown, what was seen and what wasn't seen. So the US government didn't have a problem with all these young people who are online getting all of their news and views from some social media app, just so long as it was one that was owned by some idiot who would play ball with Uncle Sam. And Mark Zuckerberg is definitely that useful idiot. And the same thing goes for Elon Musk. Don't let him fool you. This is a man who is slavishly dependent on U.S. government subsidies for his hundreds of billions of dollars. And that being the case, no matter what idiocy he may spout, whenever he gets behind closed doors with those politicians, you better believe he understands he's got to play ball. So no matter what the U.S. government, the white media, and their assorted sock puppets may tell you, the reason that they don't like TikTok has nothing to do with Chinese influence or Chinese propaganda. It's that the Chinese government happens to be an app that has a huge audience base and a lot of influence, reaches enormous amounts of people around the world, but particularly in the United States, and yet the U.S. government and its interested parties can't control it. That's the problem. They're sitting here saying you got to give this thing to somebody else, you got to sell it, but they're making it very clear you need to sell it to an American company or to an American interested party. Now, this demand that a corporation has to sell itself to some domestic company if they want to do business in a particular country, this is not new. In fact, it's one of the main gripes that American corporations had when it came time to deal with the Japanese or the Chinese. The Japanese did and probably still do have in place that if there's some foreign company that wants to do business in Japan, well, you're going to either have to sell to a Japanese company or you're going to have to give some sort of Japanese stakeholder a huge bit of the company. This is their way of basically controlling it. This is something that these American corporations have long bristled at. They hate it. Well, now here they are in the 21st century doing the exact same thing. Now, I'm not saying this is turnabout fair play. They didn't do it as a form of retaliation so much as they didn't like the fact that this is a company that they can't control. This is one thing they don't have their hooks in, and they want to get their hooks into it. With all this phony outrage going on Capitol Hill and in the white media, understand, the goal here is not to try to force TikTok to be sold to, say, anyone other than the Chinese. It's not a matter of, well, if they go ahead and sell themselves to the Belgians or sell to the British or sell to whomever. No. This is about specifically forcing them to sell to an American person or a company or corporation or interest. That's the point they actually have to reach. This is about getting the Chinese to hand TikTok over to the U.S. So far, TikTok and its parent company ByteDance have been resisting, saying we're not going to be selling. That's the reason why the ban has occurred. This is the U.S. government, and you see that the Supreme Court basically ignored any and all bases and just said, well, as far as we're concerned, if the Chinese government has anything to do with these guys, they got to be sold immediately. Now, do you have any idea how many dummy front companies are out there that the U.S. government happens to have a piece of? There are a number of companies and so-called NGOs and others that the U.S. government actually has a piece of and has influence over and directs them. They're sock puppet organizations. Now, what would happen if a number of these other countries out there said, well, you know what, you got to hand these companies over to us. You got to sell them. So the Supreme Court ruling was not based on the law. It was the Supreme Court understanding that their job is to rubber stamp certain policies, and that's what they've done in this case. But this is not about national security. It's about political control, as it always is. And that brings me to the final part about this, and that is that even though I, as a geezer Gen Xer, can't really understand this newfangled, annoying social media stuff. And yet there's a lot of people who have benefited financially off of TikTok. There's a lot of people who sell items out of TikTok. They promote their businesses on TikTok. They use TikTok as a marketing tool. They use it as a publicity tool, and that's what it's good for. A lot of people have successfully used TikTok to make some 15-second video, which are actually nothing more than 15-second commercials for themselves. And then these little videos go viral, and as a result, a lot of people have been able to launch their businesses using TikTok. And these people who use TikTok for business purposes number in the millions. Millions of Americans. Now that means that potentially TikTok, and through them whatever Chinese interest there may be, have already cultivated a constituency in the US in the millions. One has to wonder if perhaps that's part of why all this is going on. You have a lot of young people who either weren't able to get a good job, weren't making squat in the gig economy, and TikTok provided them with a way to sell goods and services that circumvent the usual suspects like Elon Musk and Zuckerberg. And as a result, somebody felt like something needed to be done. I guess the point is that on a variety of different levels, TikTok is seen as a threat for a number of different reasons. And I guess a lot of people also realize that TikTok didn't have all the gatekeeping and roadblocks of, say, YouTube. These are the people who have seen their livelihoods and futures thrown into complete disarray by what the U.S. government is doing. And I think that this financial aspect is something the government didn't quite count on. After all, when you think that tools like Musk and Zuckerberg have cornered the market on American social media, then you really don't care that platforms like TikTok do more than host stupid videos about young people acting foolishly. That it's actually a business. That it's actually an industry. And a lot of Americans depend on it for their livelihoods. But that's what's occurred today. TikTok went offline. And then about 12 or so hours later, it came back online in anticipation that Trump's going to give them a stay of execution. But this is the part of the story that I wanted to comment on, that there's so many people who use TikTok for their financial livelihood. Americans dependent on a Chinese company. And they see the Chinese company favorably as a result. They don't give a dang what the U.S. government is saying. Imagine that. The U.S. government sitting here saying they're doing data mining. Yeah, just like Mark Zuckerberg and just like Elon Musk and others. Hell, there's a number of the apps that you use, like these delivery apps, Uber and others. They do data mining too. The Chinese actually do less data mining than these American companies do, by the way. If they weren't, then don't you think the U.S. government would be saying left, right, and center, oh, here's what they're doing, all of the violations of privacy. But for the millions of Americans who do their business on TikTok, they could care less about that. The U.S. government's been doing it for decades now. It's old hat at this point. The Chinese understand that there's not going to be a backlash against them. There would be a backlash against the U.S. government for doing this one. And that is what's happened. Both political parties, Republican and Democrat alike, under a Democrat administration, by the way, came together in order to crush this company. And keep in mind, Republicans who are always prattling on about the importance of a hands-off policy when it comes to business. And, well, if this company is getting in trouble with the government, what? Why is it because they're successful? We shouldn't be punishing success. We should be rewarding it and encouraging it. But they're looking at this and going, this ain't the kind of success we're talking about. And they don't care when Americans get hurt. This happened on Biden's watch, and this is supposed to be somebody who cares about free speech, right? And the Republicans are supposed to care about business. Here you have the intersection of both, and they show you what they really care about. Now, on a side note, yes, the Orange Man, during his time, he complained about TikTok, and he was making threats against them like he was doing against Twitter and such. But he never actually followed through on those threats. And now that he's about to re-enter the White House, he seems poised to throw TikTok a lifeline. People who liked Biden, the ones who voted for him, especially if you're anybody who happens to do business on TikTok, I want you to think about that. You see how Biden and the Republicans came together to do this. You shea butter bootlicks out there who post angry messages on Lipstick Alley or Twitter complaining about why Biden didn't cancel your student loans as if that was anything other than a PR scam. You're finding out that he doesn't care about you. He never did. He pardoned his felonious drug-addicted son. He made sure to take care of crooks and criminals, and then he coldly crushed the financial wherewithal of people, many of them young, meaning under 40 years of age, because they dared to use an app that he and his other buddies didn't like. This is economic warfare. But it seems to be not just against China, but a lot of Americans too. They're collateral damage, and they don't care about it. The white powers that be in the U.S. wanted to force TikTok to be given over to them, and their play hasn't worked. But it goes to show they're worried about their power. There used to be a time when all they had to do was simply sniffle in someone's direction and people's knees quaked. Well, apparently not only are people not scared anymore, they're becoming openly defiant. And that's the kind of thing the white power doesn't want to become habit-forming. Imagine all of this that they're doing because of a website. It's because they can't drop bombs on this problem. That's the issue they're having. And they can't send in the Marines either. So they're resorting to sanctions, which is basically what this is. And I think harming the people who rely on TikTok for their income is a willing part of it. They don't care about that. To them, that's probably a big bonus. TikTok's success, like so many other Chinese companies, has been because they were able to get American customers. Now, they can tell American companies not to advertise on TikTok or not to deal with them, but that wouldn't change anything. And telling the users and viewers of TikTok in the United States to stop using the app, that wouldn't work. So they resorted to this. The way to stop Americans from patronizing a company that they don't want them to deal with is to ban it in the US. Now, they complain about China censoring websites all the time. Oh, if this website puts up information the Chinese government likes, they ban them. Oh, this is so un-American. We would never do that here. Well, here they are doing it. No laws have been broken by TikTok. You notice that? Nobody's ever able to tell you what laws TikTok broke. They instead tell you that it's Chinese propaganda, and that's the reason why. The Chinese government has something to do with it. Yeah, just ignore all the companies that the U.S. government has its thumbs in. Interesting how the U.S. government and the white media is acting the same way that they claim the Chinese and other repressive regimes do when it comes to controlling what the public can see and hear and what the public's allowed to have access to. But understand that if they had crimes to accuse TikTok of, that's what they would be leading every story with. The fact that they don't, that should tell you everything. And for those of you who may have actually been doing business on TikTok, relying for it on your income either in total or in part, you see how quickly and eagerly both political parties came together so they could go ahead and crush this website, or at least try to, and they didn't care who got hurt. And Biden was the one who led the charge on this. He was the one who wanted to ramrod this through. And where is Kamala Harris at while all this is going on? No doubt planning her return back to California. I can only wonder whether or not she'll be underneath some other politician's desk before long. But I think this incident sheds a lot of light on a number of incidents that we've been seeing over the course of the last couple of years, including a number of legislatures that have been passing laws claiming that the issue is about trying to protect youth from pornography and such. And while I agree with that, the problem happens to be that was directly what led to the legislative precedent for this. All of this under the phony guise of we're trying to protect the public, when there are a million ways that if they had a problem with TikTok, it could have been dealt with without trying to ban it. This is the point that they wanted to reach, an all or nothing ultimatum. You will either hand it over to us or we'll shut you down in the U.S. There's a lot of people who are very much worried and scared about the influence that people are able to have through the internet, able to have through social media platforms. They've been able to circumvent the white media's trusted traditional legacy gatekeepers. And to them, this is an existential crisis. If they weren't accusing TikTok of Chinese propaganda or claiming that they were doing inappropriate data mining, they would have come up with something else. The goal was not to actually come up with an actual, realistic justification for it. The goal was just a matter of let's come up with something, this is going to be our pretense, and then we roll forward with it. Who cares whether or not anybody believes it? This is about securing our power and position. So whether you're a user of TikTok or not, whether you like TikTok or not is immaterial. It's kind of like whenever I have to remind people that whenever you hear me speaking about Bill Cosby or R. Kelly or Sean Puff Daddy Combs, it's not because I like these people. It's because there's something relevant that you need to know about and understand. You see, there were a lot of people who probably didn't have much of a problem with the attacks that came against the black media, when we were the ones online and on social media platforms who were getting shot at, metaphorically speaking, of course. You even had people like Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III floating some trial balloons, such as black identity extremists. That happened during the Trump years, might I add. There were a lot of people who didn't have a problem with that at all. You didn't hear Democrats pushing back against that at all. Because as far as they were concerned, the Trump administration was going to go ahead and get rid of some enemies that they didn't like. You see how much trouble we caused for these guys in the meanwhile. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm looking at this whole thing and saying, yeah, what's going on with TikTok, these are a lot of other people who are now catching the same kind of hell that the black media have been catching, except instead of them going after individual channels, individual users, now they're going after entire platforms. It just goes to show, as black folks, we really are the canaries in the coal mine. Nobody has a problem with us being censored, silenced, shut down. But as soon as you go after somebody who's not black, all of a sudden, there's a problem. And that's something that the rank and file among the dominant society need to figure out amongst themselves. Whether they want to admit it or not, and they don't want to admit it, The truth of the matter is that the exact same laws, policies, and these legal statutes that are supposed to be connecting black people to our rights and liberties, such as they are, and our so-called privileges, well, those are the exact same things that connect the dominant society to theirs. I'm white and I say so can only go so far, depending on how much opposition that they face. And when they face a sufficient amount of adversity, what they'll be saying is, yeah, well, you folks from the dominant society, you're the ones who are dependent on thus and so. But as for us, the ones who run things, well, we're not dependent on you at all. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Oscar Cockrell, Samora Morris, Alan Reese, Jimmy Whitfield, and Harvey Wilmore. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.